My name is Gabriel Clarke. I'm a journalist, film director, and I've covered an awful lot of sport and football especially in my career. I've worked for ITV since 1991, been to numerous World Cups and European Championships, and covered an awful lot of European and Premier League football in that time as well. Well, Viv Anderson was a Nottingham lad, and Viv got his chance at his local club. I think he'd had trials with Manchester United and it didn't go too well, and I think as a teenager, 15, 16, he was in his bedroom in tears. He talks about that being a huge setback to a young boy's dream. But he then had a trial at Nottingham Forest, and they liked what they saw. This young, athletic defender. And when Brian Clough came to the club, he liked even more what he saw in Viv Anderson, moulded him into a right back, and Viv, by his late teens, was a professional with Nottingham Forest and part of a club that was winning promotion, and then in 1978 doing the unthinkable, going from promotion to winning the league title, which was quite something. When Brian Clough came to Nottingham Forest, Brian gave Viv his opportunity, and Brian was a great believer in young players, partly because he could tell them what to do and mould them in his image, but they had to have the talent, and Viv had the talent, and he was part of that incredible Nottingham Forest team that went on this never to be repeated run. So in 1977 they win the championship now, the first division title. They're promoted. They go on to win the league title, the league championship in 1978, which is incredible. They then follow that with the European Cup in 1979. They then follow that with the European Cup in 1980. And there are a few League Cups thrown in there as well. So Viv was part of an incredible Nottingham Forest team. He was integral to that team that Clough built. And through that, Viv obviously gained international recognition. But Viv's career, essentially, the peak of it anyway, was in those years between 21 and 28 in this incredible Nottingham Forest team that did something that we talk about Leicester doing what they did in the Premier League, winning that title, being incredible. But what Nottingham Forest did was as close to a footballing miracle that English football has seen. It has to be remembered as well that Viv had a really good career. Maybe not reaching quite the highs he was ever going to reach with Nottingham Forest, but he had a really good career with two of the greatest clubs in English football, Arsenal and Manchester United. So he moved on to Arsenal, and then he was Sir Alex Ferguson's first signing when Sir Alex joined Manchester United, which gives you a sense of how highly Viv was regarded at that time. He was able as well to operate as a right back, but also he had that ability later in his career to operate as a centre half. He had that ability to read a game. That's certainly something that came over the course of his career. He had real athleticism and great experience, and I think the leadership qualities that maybe you didn't need in those early parts of his career at Nottingham Forest. That was something that Ferguson really admired and needed when he took over at Manchester United. November the 29th, 1978, an historic day for English football. Viv Anderson became the first black player to start a match, to win a full cap for England's full senior side. And England played Czechoslovakia that night. It was a freezing Wembley evening at the old Wembley Stadium, obviously. And for Viv, aged just 22 at the time, this was, well, the moment I think which now most defines his career. He was a pioneer that night. That shirt he wore became so special. He became England's first black player at full international level. Possibly wasn't aware of the importance of it. I know there was some publicity around it building up that week, and he discussed it with Brian Clough, what it meant to be called up into the squad, but then to be named and selected in the first 11 by Ron Greenwood was something special. And his father went to the game, his family watched. I think in terms of an intimate experience for Viv, it all worked perfectly because England won that game too. I think he was involved in the goal. And what a night. But like all nights when something pioneering happens, it's only with the course of time that it's really recognized. And nobody, obviously, will ever break that record. Viv is the first among equals. His book was entitled The First Among Unequals, his biography, for obvious reasons. But he was breaking a particular barrier that night, which nobody will ever match. That's his, and that's a very special place in English football history that his career holds, and obviously a very special place in English history for that shirt. Viv, like so many black players in that era in the 1970s, was the first real iteration of black players coming into English football at a high level. Obviously it was followed around about the same time. You had West Brom, most famously with Cyril Regis, Brendan Batson and Laurie Cunningham coming through under Ron Atkinson. And that team obviously was iconic, but Viv was just before that, and Viv, like many players in that time who were coming through, suffered racism consistently at grounds, going to grounds, pretty much in most of the games that he played, he says, especially in certain parts of England, northern parts of England, he said, where diverse communities weren't as common. So he had to deal with that. And it has to be remembered, I think, that for black players coming through at that time, young players like Ian Wright, who looked up to Viv so much, this idea of, Ian captures it with one sentence, if you see it, you can be it. So Viv wearing that England shirt that night, Viv wearing Nottingham Forest shirt when they win these trophies, Viv is one of the few black players at that time operating at a high level, well, the only black player at that time winning the European Cup. It's phenomenal. And that's what brings home the significance when somebody like Ian Wright says, I was watching this player, and by seeing him there, I believed it could be possible for me. And that is the greatness in Viv Anderson. Brian Clough, I think, was very important to Viv, because Brian had given this young talent an opportunity, but obviously Viv's particular challenge meant that Brian Clough had to manage Viv in a particular way and be sensitive around that. And Viv talks very well about the way in which Clough would almost lace with humour the way that he dealt with racism, this idea that you don't let them win. So when he could see Viv suffering genuinely from bananas being thrown out of the crowd at him at games, pieces of fruit, Viv talks about that. And then Brian Clough would go over to him and say, don't let them bother you. Get me an apple, get me a banana, bring it back here, and carry on with your game. And he was lacing his advice with humour to help, and I think it did help Viv. But yet there was a defiance in Clough, and obviously Clough felt very strongly that Viv needed support, and Viv, I know, was very thankful for the way in which Brian Clough enabled him to get through those particular challenges. What strikes you when you meet Viv is that he's incredibly humble, and he wants to be known as a great footballer, not necessarily as the record-breaking pioneer for black players that he is. Obviously, that is something which is hugely important when you look at his career's work and what he achieved. But the footballer and the man are highly regarded. As a person, he's very modest. Some might say maybe a little bit too modest for what he achieved. Maybe there would have been a few more England caps. He won 30 caps over 10 years. Maybe there might have been a few more England caps if he'd maybe been a little bit more, I don't know, not outgoing, but maybe less humble. But he was, listen, there were some very talented defenders around at that time, and Viv went to many tournaments with England and was part of some huge moments in English football history. The man is very modest, very much in love with football, and very much, I think, somebody who is proud of what he achieved, and rightly so. Nottingham Forest, Arsenal, Manchester United. He then went on to become one of the first black player managers at Barnsley in the early 90s, which is in itself another barrier that he overcame. So this is a man who's achieved so much in English football. The collection, I think, represents the scale of his career, a very special career. At the centre maybe is this one shirt from 1978, but the scale of his career is there for all to see in this great collection of memorabilia, and yeah, a great figure in English football, a great figure in English football.